Welcome back to the Valley to Peak Nutrition Podcast. It is Mark and I this week, and we are covering a topic that had me eat a big slice of humble pie to even come up with, but I felt like it was worth doing, especially if you're going to talk so openly about nutrition, like you have to revisit your thoughts. So this week we are covering a topic called I Was Wrong, 3 things that has changed in my mind in the last 5 years about nutrition. The topic came about in my head based on a couple of things. One was, I think, just like with nutrition, you're always going back and reading stuff. There's always stuff coming out and you're always reading it and you're trying to decipher whether or not it's true, or, you know, you'll read the headline of something, but you have to read the full article to see if it's true. So my understanding of like nutrition, that advice that's come out, but also in working with people, and that'll make sense as we start to open these up. But I'm really excited to hear what your 3 are.
I was more excited to do this when you floated the idea, because I was just like, I wanted to be there firsthand and witness what the nutritionist said. So I don't think it's as interesting to think of what me as a Joe Schmo changed my mind on. But yeah, it'll be fun to hear yours too.
Yeah, but you're not a Joe Schmo though. You're like this is a topic that you really, like, you personally try to abide by and stay on top of. You're like me in the sense of very analytical, and like you don't just take things at face value. And so, I mean, I know that about you. You're a great friend, and but for those reasons too, I thought this would be a great one to do with you.
Yeah, it'll be fun. So who's going to break the ice? Can we start with you?
I think we can go 1 for 1 here.
All right,
is it
you're
me?
the host. You have to lead. Yeah.
All right, number 1. Oh man, this is even hard to say. Number 1 thing that I've changed my mind on in nutrition over the last 5 years is that supplements are always crap or garbage. And I'll give you a couple of examples, and this in my mind is a really, really broad topic, so I'll try not to make this crazy long. So one example would be collagen protein. One example would be creatine. And so, like, let me elaborate a little bit. When you look at different proteins are made up of different building blocks. And the amount of specific building blocks from each protein can vary based on the protein source. Collagen protein happens to have some building blocks that we know do support connective tissue, joints, etc. Higher percentages of those than in other proteins. And so before, you know, the message from me was always all supplements are crap, don't think about them, move on with your life. But there are, I think, instances where some can be helpful and productive. And then I've got a however that I'll insert in a minute, but you look like you want to chime in here.
No, I'm just enjoying this. That's
okay.
All.
The other one would be creatine. And so first of all, I still think that supplements are pointless if you have not mastered the basics. I still think that this is very much a case use instance, and we'll use both of these to highlight what I mean. We'll take creatine, for example. Creatine is one where not everyone's going to benefit. In fact, like for most research, we see that 50% are responders, 50% are non-responders. If you have someone who eats absolutely no protein at all and they're vegan, but they begin taking creatine, they could see pretty profound effects from that, because creatine is a naturally occurring substance in meat products. If you have someone, like people who listen to this, that eat meat probably multiple times per day, taking an extra dose of creatine may yield nothing, because your stores are already full and your intake is already pretty high throughout the course of the day too. So one thing that has changed even with this podcast over the years is, like, when we first started, it was predominantly people who enjoyed the outdoors, but they did that in the context of hunting. And now we have people who don't hunt at all, don't eat meat, right? And we still have hunters too. So for me to be on here saying all supplements are garbage, that might not be true for someone who is vegan and who doesn't eat meat. And the same with the collagen protein. You're going to have higher doses of those amino acids in proteins from meat, but maybe less so than in vegan sources. So in those two instances, supplements could be helpful. There are, though, still a vast majority of supplements out there that are complete garbage. Like, I'll give you another example here. Supplement companies who are marketing predominantly to the outdoor industry and selling something like a hydration mix. And inside that hydration mix is nothing that hydrates you. You don't, or not, it's not in a high enough dose to either give you electrolytes, allow you to hold more water, or anything like that. That is really no more than flavored water, but you're selling it as a hydration mix. People are buying it as a hydration mix, which is probably causing them to drink more water. And so, yes, my life has changed through this. And it's like, well, now you're drinking the amount of water you should have. So I still stand on the idea that if you're not mastering the basics, that's still going to get you as close as possible. But I can't, and I have changed my mind on just this generalized idea or blanket statement of all supplements being crap, because there are some instances where they can be effective in certain situations.
Where they supplement a deficiency. So, like you said, the case of someone who doesn't eat meat at all or much, like if they had a more well-rounded diet and better sources of these naturally occurring compounds, right? Creatine, what have you, perhaps the diet could fix it. So the supplement isn't needed based on the diet, but in their specific case, there's a deficiency, and therefore it's, as the word defines, a true supplement to a
Yeah.
deficiency that they have.
Yeah, and I that's an excellent synopsis of how to put my long-winded off track answer and ramblings. But one thing, like in as we've had more and more people come through Valley to Peak and more people ask about different nutrition questions, when the supplement one comes up, like my baseline mantra has sort of become, I think that the two things that would guide my decisions on whether or not I'm going to take a supplement is, am I is the supplement that I'm taking, am I not able to get those nutrients through ordinary food for one reason or another, or are my needs so high that I can't get them from food? In which case, yeah, both of those would warrant a supplement. But outside of that, the place that I still would always start is trying to really zero in on and nail down my daily intake. That still is going to be the most productive thing to do for most people.
Hmm. This is like a nuanced example, maybe not helpful, but my wheels are turning. Take like someone, where my mind was going was vitamin D. You could have someone who seasonally, because of exposure and weather patterns and all that based on their location, could receive quote unquote natural vitamin D, but then perhaps need to consider supplementing seasonally, right? Because of winter, lack of exposure, etc. But even in that case, would they ever actually know if one, they needed to supplement with vitamin D, or two, they reaped the benefits of taking a supplement if they weren't doing something like blood work to look at their levels?
No, you nailed it when you said blood work. I mean, that's the only real way to evaluate whether or not you're deficient or not. Now, there, like you take the case of vitamin D, some people will say lack of vitamin D can lead to higher rates of depression, but so can winter, right? I mean, just like endless hours of darkness or more hours of darkness, less sunlight, people tend to go outside less, etc. And I think the other piece that complicates that is with vitamin D, there's a conversion that has to take place in the kidneys for that to even be active. There's different forms of vitamin D. So you bring up a good point. I don't even know if this was your point, but it makes me think of this in that me giving nutrition advice, you also have to be careful by casting advice broadly and saying everyone in the winter should supplement with vitamin D because there are so many nuances. And there are, like, this is the other piece with all supplements. Vitamin D is a good example of that. Toxicity values. Vitamin D, all of the fat soluble vitamins, which are A, D, E, and K, can hit a level that build up in the body and you can't get rid of them. There are some other ones that you have a lot less risk of doing that because you just pee the excess out. But those aren't necessarily true of, fat soluble vitamins and minerals and a few other things. So you bring up a good point, or at least it makes me think of, you also can't just throw random suggestions out there based on um, a big group of people because it's not always going to be true.
Yeah, there's a lot to that because then you get into supplementation and, as you said, like the source, the quality of the supplement itself, right? Um, is it what it says it is? Can your body absorb what it says you're receiving? There's so many aspects to that.
You're up, number one.
All right. This is not a new idea by any means. I've heard you talk about it, etc. But it really, I guess I would boil it down to there are no quote unquote bad foods. Historically, 10 years ago, there was things that me labeling something was a bad food was a lazy label to put on something I knew I needed to avoid at that point in time. And as I've heard you say, like the dose makes the poison, right? So it's not what, it's how much, it's frequency, it's all those things. And so what I've come to accept is like things that I used to label as bad aren't bad. It was, my intake of them, frequency, quantity, etc. And there's certain quote unquote bad foods or junk foods that I can enjoy at a very acceptable level as like a treat, or even literally be able to take a bite of something and enjoy it and realize that the fifth bite wouldn't be as enjoyable, right? You don't get that same experience. And then there are still some foods that, and obviously mostly treats that I just flat out know I don't have self-discipline for. And so it's not that that food's bad, it's knowing the difference between what you can and can't control yourself with, if that makes sense.
Was there any, like, one thing or time in the last 10 years, or maybe it was an evolution of things where you started to, I have two questions based on that, where you started to, like, allow yourself to have more variety than maybe whatever your standard nutrition was whenever you were losing weight?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was losing weight, I was of course just more strict about everything, right? And so I was labeling these things as bad because I didn't want them. I knew I couldn't enjoy them or that they shouldn't be part of my current place and goals. But then when I, reached a point where I wasn't losing weight, and then at times gone through seasons where I've been training so significantly, I was like almost 20 in excess calories, not in terms of a build or like trying to get jacked, but just because I was getting leaner than I wanted to be, that I was like, okay, well, I can begin to let myself like loosen up, enjoy some of this, etc. And so there's definitely been like this pendulum and swing. Um, but yeah, I think I just realized in general that based on where you're at, based on what your goals are, there, even if you are losing weight, there's no quote unquote bad food, right? Like you could be on a very aggressive weight loss journey and have a bite of cake, perhaps a piece of cake. But it also takes the self-awareness to know, well, if I have a bite, am I going to have like half a sheet, right? And so it's not that that cake is bad. It's you may need to avoid it for your goals, or you may need to realize like I can legitimately have 2 bites of this and get a lot of enjoyment out of that and not have to eat 3 pieces, right? And again, I know those aren't new topics of what you've talked about, but as I've thought about this idea and like changes over the 10 years, it's like, okay, there's things I used to say was bad and now I just don't think it's bad. It's all about the application and the dose.
Do you think that your your change in thinking as far as that goes has allowed you to adhere to some structure to your nutrition plan that's allowed you to stick to or keep to your weight loss goals, right? Because you lost 80 pounds.
I'm bad at mathing. 60 something. Yeah.
Do you feel like you allowing some of these things on occasion in the appropriate dose has allowed you to stick to this long term as opposed to maybe gripping the rails of some really strict structure for the last however many years it's been?
Oh yeah, for sure. 100%. I mean, within the last, it's been, well, my son's 12 and I was essentially the weight I am now when he was born. And then my daughter's 15 and I was heavy when she was born. So between 12 and 15 years ago is when my weight loss occurred. And it didn't take that 3 years. But it was in that period. And then since at least before my son's been born, so call it 12, 13 years, I've been plus or minus, 4 pounds of 185. I don't think I've ever been above 190. I've dipped below 180, but that's too light for me. But anyway, yeah, I think there's two things to that. One is allowing yourself some enjoyment and being intentional with it keeps you from too strict of adherence and then going off the rails. Yes. And another point that comes up to me is when you've developed better habits and you have more consistency in your diet and nutrition and you feel better, when you do overindulge on things, you feel it and you feel worse. And I think a lot of people who are, overindulging things or overweight or etc., their just baseline is totally different. They don't realize actually how bad they feel because they're not, this is just what they're used to feeling, right?
Yeah.
Whereas now, have those days or celebrations or parties and like, a little bit too much of stuff, like I legit just feel like trash.
I tell Lindsay every Christmas, every Thanksgiving, every birthday, those tend to be like the days that I just do whatever. They always serve as reminders of how much I'm not missing out on.
Yeah.
Right. And I think another thing that I personally have learned since losing however many, the weight that I lost 15 years ago was we started going to like, 2 to 3 years after I'd lost the weight, we started going to summer barbecues or birthdays or Thanksgiving or whatever. People would look at my plate and they would say, "Oh, I just wish I could be as disciplined as you," because it would be like it would have, what you would think looks healthy on it, right? Vegetables or piece of chicken, whatever. And my reply at first, like I didn't know how to reply to it, but it started becoming like, I you're giving me too much credit. This is like this is what I like, like this, the same way that your plate is made up of stuff that you like. I'm not even saying that's good, bad, or indifferent, but the same way that you chose everything on your plate because you thought it sounded good to you, that's exactly what I did. I just picked the things I like. So one of the most interesting things that had happened in the evolution of the years since I've lost the weight was my tastes changed completely. I mean, they totally changed. And you hear that, or I would hear that often prior to losing the weight. And I would think, like, how is that even possible that you go from not wanting donuts, not wanting pizza to wanting fruits and vegetables? And I think what happened is I still want, like, and eat donuts and pizza and ribs and whatever else. I just also really like these other quote healthy foods, so I don't feel restricted by choosing those and choosing the others less, whether that's less often frequency or whether it's smaller portion size. I think that that balance, like you've talked about, is excellent because I I don't I don't ever feel like I'm on or off any plan. I just really try to be balanced with it all.
Hmm.
It's a great
Yeah,
points. All right, ready for two?
let's do it.
All right. For clarity, we didn't share any notes before this, right?
Nothing.
Okay. Number two. One of the things that's changed the most in the last 5 years for me is my messaging on how anything can fit in a diet. And so let me provide some clarity here. So, I mean, I didn't even think about this prior to us coming on the podcast, but the very first podcast that I was ever on was with you. It was on EXO, however many years ago that was. And like one of the biggest takeaways from that, the thing that I got the most messages about was the gummy bears, right? That whole idea. And so over the years, I embraced and still do embrace that because in the right context, they are great. But it sort of became as like, oh man, you're the guy who just says eat whatever you want and you can lose weight. And while true, like we just talked about, what I have also seen in working with people in Valley to Peak since that first podcast is the tremendous value of not having that stuff all the time because it allows you to create different habits, create different patterns. You're going to deal way less with hunger, you're going to deal way less with cravings, you're going to all of the things that typically come up for someone when they're trying to make strides with their nutrition really go away for the most part when most of the food that you're eating is nutrient dense, whole, call it quote unquote healthy food, what most people would file under that category. Now, I think we've got to make a little concerted effort to make that taste good. Like you can't just cook chicken in a pan and expect it to be good. Like add some sauce to it or something, so you actually like it. But I think that one thing that's changed for me is that idea of anything can fit, though it can, you're really going to take away a lot of issues by making a vast majority of your food more whole, nutrient dense, good, solid nutrition options. And it was interesting for you to in the segment that you just outlined say the difference between having a bite of cake or eating the entire sheet. There are times where it could be good to avoid certain things. If you have a hard time controlling that dose, or you have a hard time, in any capacity with that, there are periods of time where it's better to not have any. The first year that I lost weight, I didn't eat anything that I do now because I knew I had no idea how to manage that in an appropriate way, but still make these goals for myself. And the goals were at that point, like, really my health, because I was pretty rough shape when I first started. So as I hit my weight goal, then I started slowly reintroducing stuff and sort of looking at what the dose looks like. So while it is true that nothing's good, nothing's bad, it's always the dose, it can be true that when that dose is small, it makes life a lot easier if you have specific nutrition goals.
Yeah. Yeah. And specific, I hate this word because of the way it's been co-opted, but like I would call it trigger foods, right? Like there's just flat out, you may find that, pick 10 quote unquote of the quote unquote bad foods or junk foods or whatever. And maybe you just realize that, oh, I'm like fine with a very small dose of 4 of these, but 6 of these, like I just need to flat out avoid cake or ice cream or what have you. But these other 4, like I can tolerate, like I can get a little quote unquote fix, like have a little taste, like enjoy a little bite. And it just comes down to behavior.
Yeah, and I think like so even now, I took my son, I took both of our boys today for donuts. We had pizza last week. So we'll eat burgers, we taco. We still do all of that stuff. But 90% of the time outside of when we go do those things, like we eat pretty what most people would classify as healthy food. And over the years, like we've tried to learn how to make it taste good, and it's not just plain chicken, just plain broccoli, just plain rice. Like we've tried to add some variety so it looks like something you would actually want to eat. But we do have those things, but it is not the vast majority of our diet, and it does help, to adhere closer to a plan. Now, I'll save this story for the next one. Yeah. Yep. All right.
Um, I think my next one is I've been trying to think of how to put this because I have like the idea when I get across, but in terms of like a short snippet of I was wrong, that's where I struggle. But um, I guess I would just say I was wrong on the need to constantly plan and prepare to eat correctly, I guess, right? So, if we take again like a pendulum on one side, you have the person who just like they show up, they eat whatever, they go out to eat, they eat whatever. They're not concerned with calories or macronutrients or their health or their weight necessarily. Like they're just kind of eating whatever sounds good in the moment, what they enjoy, etc. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have, you know, plan every calorie, every macro, everything is specific, everything is intentional. And that takes a lot of time and effort and planning and mental energy, etc. And that I thought like for my weight loss journey, that's where I went to was that side of the spectrum, right? Like I had to make changes. I had to figure things out. I had to plan in advance for, it's my cousin's birthday next week and we're going out to wherever, right? And that's all, a great journey to go on, I think, because you learn a lot through that about being intentional and about learning, what food really is and what calories really are and the deception of what I think I eat versus what is actually there. And for a long time, I thought I thought I was going to have to live on that side of the pendulum and spectrum to maintain and to get to where I'm at now, 12, 13 years later and stay that way. I thought I was just always going to have to spend so much like time and energy and thought going into planning intake. And I was wrong about that because once you have the knowledge and you go through the process of learning it, it's much easier to apply it. And so it doesn't take as much forethought. It still takes intentionality to make the decision, but it just doesn't take as much forethought and advanced planning and things like that for two reasons. One is I think for myself, and most people would probably find themselves in a spot where there's just a lot of consistency. Like you said, Kyle, there's the variability of like you have the pizza, you have the whatever, but day to day, there's probably a lot of consistency in your diet. I know that there isn't mine. And then two, when there's not consistency, when you are outside of the norm or the day to day or your house, you have the base knowledge to know how to make decisions, not only for that specific meal, but also how that specific meal applies to the broader context of, hey, maybe I can just like order whatever I want off of the menu right now because I know that this is one meal out of 20 that I'm going to eat this week. And as long as I'm consistent and on the right track with those other 20 meals, like I can eat whatever I want right now at this one. It's when that one becomes seven, right? It's dinner every night that looks like that. So all that to summarize, I think I was wrong about the what it requires to live kind of a healthy life in terms of food. I thought it was always going to require so much work and burden, and it really doesn't.
Yeah, I think you clarified it, but I was gonna ask, like, do you think the simplicity now is the byproduct of that focus you had earlier on, right? Like, because you did pay attention for so long, you understand nutrition better. therefore it's become easier. Whereas maybe like someone else may think it should be easy up front, but you kind of have to invest that time to get there.
Correct. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Like I think I've heard you say, in terms of like weighing and measuring all your foods, that the goal isn't that you have to do that all the time. Maybe people want to, maybe that's how they stay on track. That's fine. But the process of doing that for a significant amount of time, enough to learn, is it helps you calibrate. And so, yes, it's the process I went through of the intentionality and the effort and the understanding and all of that that gave me the foundation to go, okay, well, I know how this works now. Like I know what this means. I know how to apply the information and how to make good decisions on a consistent basis. And it doesn't always feel like a ton of work.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. I mean, it gets way easier. And I think that like you brought up a good point in there where you said, okay, you go out to dinner and you order anything on the menu. You're not even necessarily looking for the healthiest thing. And you realize that that's one meal of potentially 20 that week or 30 that week. What I think this goes back into the comments that the first one that you brought up, which was about kind of not saying there's any bad foods. One of the problems with categorizing anything as bad is because when someone does, this is a prime example. I had someone in the program who sent me an email last night and said, I sure goofed up. I went and had this pasta dish in an Italian restaurant. I split a lemon tart dessert with a friend, and I also had a croissant. And I wrote back and I said, sounds like a great time in a great evening with a friend. Doesn't sound like you've messed up at all. She ate half the pasta dish, which portion sizes, and she could tell me she ate the whole thing, and my reply would have been the same. But then I gave her this piece of advice. I said, today's a brand new day. If you did that every day, you'd probably have a hard time seeing your goals hit. But you're not doing it every day. And the place that it becomes the problem with categorizing foods as good and bad is if you categorize all of those as bad food, you now feel like you have failed. So why even do anything the next day? And those type of things serve as the catalyst for, just like you said, the next 7 meals being like that. And we as a culture have grown to believe like a meal, a single food, a episode is what caused me to gain weight. I eat, 3 slices of pizza, I get on the scale the next day and I weigh 3 more pounds. Look at how much weight I gained with pizza. It's like, that's water weight. That is not because of 3 slices of pizza. So if you can then rationalize, yeah, I had a great time. It was a great meal. Today's a brand new day. And the next 7 days look great. You can start to build consistency. And if you have consistency, you'll start to see progress, right? And you'll have sanity because now you can have some stuff that you actually enjoy. So I love that one. I think it's a great one.
Yeah.
All right. Number 3. Oh boy. All right. Number 3. The thing that has changed in my mind, please do not turn this off until you hear all of this.
I'm already planning on taking a snippet and just like posting this to social media.
Yeah, that's exactly what'll happen. Dietitian's a liar. Listen to what he said. The third thing that's changed is that it is always calories in versus calories out. Now, it is always calories in versus calories out. However, there are a variety of factors that make that equation more challenging to hit for many people than others, right? So while it is always calories in versus calories out, you could have, right? So the way that we determine calories is based off of an individual's height, their weight, their gender, a lot of different things. So you could have all of those same numbers. You could have 10 people that were all the same age, the same gender, the same height, the same weight, the same everything. All 10 of them are going to have different metabolisms. Their calorie needs for weight loss, weight maintenance, weight gain will all be different based on several different factors, but one of those things being genetics. So you could have one person where it's extremely hard for them to move weight. Their calorie needs are extremely low, whereas that same person of the same height, weight, gender, age, etc., they move weight just by blinking an eye. It's extremely easy to them. And so there's a variety of factors involved with that, in which you have to adjust the nutrition for the person to get that weight to move, which will make this is the important part that and I wanted to make is it will make some people's perception of this a breeze, and it will make someone else's perception of this absolute misery. And a lot of that has to do with variables. Some of that has to do with variables that we can't control. Some of it, though, is variables that we can control, right? Like, so two prime examples. One major determinant of a person's metabolism being fast or slow is how much they move in a given day. That could be in the context of a gym or a garage gym or a walk or walks on lunch or taking an escalator or parking further away from, the department store door. I don't even know if we have department stores anymore. It seems like everything's online, but if we did. The other thing that can really play a major role in that is a person's composition. If you have a greater, so you could have 10 people, 10 males, they all weigh 185 pounds, they're all 30 years old. One person could have a vast majority of that 185 pounds be made up of muscle. One person could have a vast majority of that 185 pounds made up of water and body fat. The individual with muscle will have a much, much higher calorie demand and make weight loss easier than the person who has a much higher percentage of that 185 pounds coming from fat. So there are variables that we can control that make it either harder or easier. And it is still calories in versus calories out. But what makes that easy or difficult is a variety and a vast majority of different things.
I don't know if you can answer this or how much it comes into play, but one of the quote unquote different things in my head that could potentially affect this, or maybe it doesn't affect it much, I don't know. But say it's me, I'm 39, I'm male, I'm 185 pounds, I'm 6'2". Like nothing about me changes, my physical body. And let's say nothing about my gross output in terms of calorie burn, meaning I don't change my fitness program, period. So I, as a person, I'm not changing, and my intentional fitness and calorie burn doesn't change. But let's say over the next 3 months, I go through a season of, higher stress, less sleep, things of that nature. And what's in a perfect world, I haven't changed my diet, haven't changed my exercise, and I'm still the same person. But things like sleep, stress, which I'm assuming would have a hormone response, would you anticipate that that would have a potentially noticeable effect on metabolism and or potentially weight gain or loss or something to that effect?
Probably not on metabolism. Could have an effect on weight gain or loss because of what those situations drive us to do, right? So less sleep, higher stress, not in every situation, but is almost always going to drive a person to choose easier things. I'm not going to work out. I'm not going to go for the walks. I'm not going to make the good decision at the lunch buffet. I'm not going to avoid the craving in the evening. We're not going to do those things. Now, I will say that that same cascade of scenarios will cause an adjustment in hormones, like you had mentioned, and that will cause us to carry more water. So we will feel more fluffy. We won't look as lean. And that will often then get into our psychology of the mentality of like, why even try? Right. And so now all of a sudden, again, a lot of those things that we'd mentioned earlier tend to go down. There's like, so here's another really great example. In a group of women, when whenever they get older, we'll study them. And so you'll have like people that are post-menopause, for example. And one of the big things in the US is that when women hit that specific age, there's a hormonal change that happens and it becomes, quote, impossible to lose weight. However, there's research now that we have coming out that if you account for the variables that we know that are tied to that, and I'll give you some examples in a minute, we find that those same women, regardless of their age or what state they're in life, pre, post, whatever menopause, everything's equal. It's as though they never really went through that, from at least from a metabolism and a muscle gain standpoint. But what tends to happen is we get a hormonal change. We become more tired. We then become less active. We're not resistance training. Therefore, we have less muscle mass. Therefore, we are not only burning less calories during the day because we're no longer training, we also have less muscle mass, which then lowers our metabolism, which then makes it nearly impossible to try to consume 900 calories and lose weight. But if you account for those variables, nearly all of that goes away. And so I think, like, even though all of this is true, and this is one of the things that I have in my note, even though there's always, everyone has their number in terms of their metabolism, we don't necessarily have to be a victim to the number. There are variables within that, hard as they may be to go out and actually execute, that we can control, and we can, quote unquote, increase our metabolism, right? And so I think that, like, one of this all came about through the number of people that we've had come through Valley to Peak over the years. And my understanding and how all of this works, really, like when I first started becoming a dietitian, it was like a number. It still is a number, but what I started to learn and notice was, like, all of these variables make it either really easy for someone or really challenging for someone. And if you can get a person to control for those variables, it helps. It helps a lot. So you'll hear things online too, like, don't ever listen to someone who tells you to eat 1,300 calories, or don't ever listen to someone who tells you as a male not to eat 1,500 calories. Sometimes that's your number because of these different variables. If you're inactive and you don't resistance train and you work at a desk job and you have a higher percent of body fat to your weight than you do lean muscle, and you're eating foods that are really tasty and easy to overdo and you're not tracking, it could be pretty low because there's not a lot of calories required to operate in that situation. Now, if you compare that to maybe the same person of the same height, the same weight, etc., who works in construction and then goes to the gym for a resistance training program 5 days a week before they go to construction and then plays with their kids in the evening, this person hasn't necessarily just been, quote, blessed with the high metabolism. They're just active. They have a higher percentage of muscle mass, both because of their job and their choices. And so, yeah, it's a lot easier for them to lose weight because of all of these variables. And so while it is still a number, it's not as simple as just saying create a math equation, because a lot of these variables make it hard. It makes it really hard.
But essentially, you're still going to start with the math equation, right?
Yes. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm being somewhat facetious, right? Because I'm saying, oh, this is what I've changed my mind about. I'm not changing my mind about it being a math equation. That'll never change. That's science. But I have changed my mind, and more importantly, my messaging with people on helping them understand why this is. Because people, like, in working with people, they almost like hate themselves. They almost hate their body because they feel like I've been dealt this hand. And it's like, yes, it could make it more challenging, but here's a list of things that we can do to change it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I like what you said about the messaging, because I think there's so much there on, yeah, we're not changing the formula. We're not changing science. Like, there's some factors that can affect that in some minor ways, but it's also just how you approach it and not just getting lost in the pure black and white number.
Yeah, because you'll give them a number and people will become discouraged as to, like, well, why am I eating that little? My sister-in-law eats X, Y, and Z and she's, like, doing whatever. It's like, well, that's your number, and that's your number because of these factors. And so when they understand that, it now then makes sense to them, right? And so this is the story I was going to share on number 2, but I didn't. I've had people in the program, like I'll never forget this guy. He was just a busy guy who owned multiple businesses, blah, blah, blah. He'd drink 2 protein drinks during the day, eat 2 boxes of Nerds while he was at work, and he would eat dinner with his family. He lost 25 pounds. Unconventional. It's not like I suggested that, but he was able to adhere to that.
The bigger
And
boxes of Nerds, or
yeah, it
like
was
those
the
tiny
big
little
the big
fun
boy.
size Halloween ones.
No, sometimes I think he even threw in the Nerd ropes too. He got real adventurous. So, like, though unconventional, though not like what I would lay it out as, and I'm not sitting here recommending it, it does go into where I said, well, clarifying my messaging on eating nutrient dense foods more often, how you can't fit any, you can, if you control the dose, it will work, right? But on the second side of that, it is calories in, calories out. He lost 25 pounds because he controlled his calories, even though it's in this way that's probably not conventional. I had another guy who ate Chick-fil-A every single day because of his job, and same deal, lost a significant amount of weight. And so it because of the fact that it is still calories in, calories out, as much as we don't want to believe that, as much as all these influencers don't want you to believe that, it does still boil down to that. But there are things that make that either really, really, really easy for someone or really, really, really hard for someone. And this is also why you can't just get online and go to some calorie calculator, plug in your number, plug in your stats, gives you this readout, you go home and do it, and you're beating your head against the wall wondering, well, this is what the calculator said, why am I not, what am I doing wrong? It's because you are not a calculation. I mean, there's so much more that goes into it beyond just a calculator.
Yeah. You mentioning the guy with the Nerds and the guy who ate Chick-fil-A every day. These previous clients of yours makes me want to have you have like a podcast episode on like spilling the basically just like sharing client stories, not with them necessarily. Like you've done some of those and those are fun, but more of these like quirky, like
Keep them anonymous.
10, yeah, like keep them anonymous and be like 10 crazy clients that Kyle's had over the
That's a
years
good
and,
idea.
and how they
That's a
lost
really good
weight.
idea.
It'd
the
be
the
so
irony
cool.
for both of them is because those were so simple and allowed them to be consistent now, and they have both kept it off because it's just and that's the name of the game. The name of the game is not good and bad foods and numbers and blah blah blah. It's finding what you can do more times than not, just about every day, and do it over and over and over and over again. And that's what produces the progress.
Yeah. That's like another way to frame what I was trying to get at, my second point of like it's not always going to take so much work and planning and effort as I thought it was going to. Because once you find what works and you find foods that you like and you find meals that you can be consistent with that keep you at a sustainable weight, then boom, like I mean, 80 to 90% of what I do nutritionally is just on autopilot. Like I don't think about it, I don't stress about it, I don't worry about it. I don't gain weight, I generally don't lose weight. I know when I do, why I do, right? Like whether that's a training variable or it's a nutrition variable. And it's just like boom, it's on autopilot. And a lot of it's consistent, but gosh dang, like you were saying earlier, I still enjoy so much. Like we had burgers last night. I had pizza with my kids on Father's Day weekend. I had, you know, a dessert. It's just not crazy rigid and structured and avoiding these quote unquote bad foods. It's consistency. I mean, at the end of the day, like boil everything down. If you can find consistency, you're gonna have a consistent result.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an excellent summary of it. Number
We're back
3.
to me.
Yeah.
All right. So this one is less day to day, may not apply to everyone. It's more on the the backpack side of things, the outdoorsman, the hunter, etc. So not day-to-day nutrition, but I remember writing an article more than 10 years ago for sure about what to look for in foods for backpack hunting. And for sure, one of the big things that I was trying to do with that was optimize weight, optimize calorie per ounce, and optimize that ratio. And in a perfect world, I would say that that would still be really important to me, but it's almost become the last thing that I look at, or sometimes don't look at all, when I now pack food for an extended hunt. And it still bugs me because food is, you know, essentially one of the heaviest things, right? You go on a 10-day hunt and it's like, well, this could be a 2-day hunt or a 10-day hunt. Really, the only variable is an extra 8 days of food. And holy cow, that is a lot of weight that I'm carrying. And so between either wanting to optimize the calories per ounce and how efficient that food is, and or just pack less food to save weight, would be two things that I had done historically that I don't do anymore. And so for me personally, I was wrong about worrying about how much food I was carrying in terms of weight.
What has that translated into from an options standpoint, right? Like, so if you go back to the days of Soul Adventure and you were
Exactly.
doing like your Kentucky elk hunt and some of the first Colorado elk hunts,
Yeah.
and like you've sort of let go of that idea, how has what you take changed, practically speaking?
Yeah, I mean, I know obviously you know this and many people will understand it, but the basic premise of trying to be efficient with calories per ounce is you're just flat out going to eat more fats, right? Like you can get more calories per ounce if you eat foods that are fat sources or higher in fat content. And people on the extreme end of that will be packing olive oil and counting that as food. I hate to break it to you, but olive oil is not food, right? Like you can supplement it, you can put it on something, you can put it in something, but olive oil is not food. And I would do that. I would like say, okay, if I want to get away with 2,500 calories or 3,000 calories on this trip, like I can pack, say, 2,500 calories of real food, but then have these olive oil packets that are going to get me an extra 500 calories. And I'll just put those in my mountain house. And then boom, like I have an extra 500 calories that didn't have to weigh much. So things like that. And then obviously just other fat sources, more nuts, more nut butters, things of that sort. And it's not that I avoid, say, nut butter, for example. I just don't start with trying to pick that because it's the most efficient way to get calories at less weight. And while I do try to look at macronutrients still, right? Like fats, proteins, carbohydrates. I don't even I don't even want to say that I start there. What I start with is what am I going to want to eat? Period. I don't care if it's efficient. I don't care if it like meets a macronutrient goal. I'm not starting with performance in mind yet. Like I want to get there. But what I start with is if I can go, I'm going to have to live in the mountains for the next week. What are 5 things that are going to sound good and be palatable and that I'll enjoy? You bet those 5 things are going in my pack. And I'll fill in, quote unquote, fill in the gaps of calories after that a little bit more strategically with, okay, well, I want to have roughly this many carbs, this many, grams of protein, etc. But that's not even where I start. I start with what sounds good, what am I actually going to want to eat and enjoy? Because I went from optimizing for calories per ounce to optimizing for a perfect blend of macronutrients that wasn't about fat. It was is more about a more balanced blend or even carb focused, more performance focused. But there was times where I executed a perfect plan on paper of carbs, fats, and proteins and total calories, but it was comprised of things that I didn't want to eat on day 3 or day 5 or day 7. And so although it was theoretically perfect, I didn't want to eat it, therefore didn't eat it, therefore my intake wasn't perfect, if that makes sense. So I essentially went from like optimize for weight to optimize for, macronutrients as a whole to now reversing that and going, I'm going to start with what I like. I don't care what it is. I don't care what the macros are. I'm going to start there. I'm going to fill in gaps to essentially meet some sort of macronutrient goal broadly for the day or the week. And then after that, it's not even generally a thought, but it would come far after that is there any way I can optimize the weight of this?
Yeah. The irony in all of that is like when someone's trying to optimize for calories per ounce, you start out doing that to try to carry the lightest load, like you had said. You wind up with so much extra food you didn't eat that you end up carrying all this weight for 7 to 10 days, when in reality, like, your pack will never be as heavy as it is on day one, and it should just go down from there as you eat through your whole food supply, to the point of where, if you're coming out and it's been 10 days, you're 30 pound to 25 to 30 pounds lighter than when you went in, but you wind up, 10 pounds lighter than when you did, because you got all this stuff still in your food bag that you never ate. And I think that's
Yeah.
an excellent point.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just, I don't know. I just realized that one, I didn't feel great eating that way, but two, I wasn't, I was forcing myself to eat partially because I wasn't feeling great, and then partially just because they didn't sound good, right? And it's like, what is the point of this? Like, yes, I came in slightly lighter on day one, but as you just said, like, I can't intake all this. I don't want to intake all this, and then I'm carrying it around, and then I'm not feeling good, and it was just such a really foolish way, at least for me, to go about the whole thing.
So as you get ready to go on a hunt, you have a couple this fall, and you start thinking about that. What is like first thing that comes to mind? I definitely want to throw this in.
Yeah, and I guess another point I should bring on this has somewhat come into play because over the last 10 years, I've spent more time eating out of a Ziploc bag, out of a backpack in the backcountry. And so it's one thing to, if you do that 5 days a year, maybe it doesn't matter. Like, you don't have to think too much about like what sounds good. But when you start doing that, 30 days a year, and you're like, well, I can't just eat these same things 30 days, or like I could choke this crappy protein bar down for a 3 or 5 day trip, but can I do that for 30 days this year? Right? Like, that's part of the practical reason I've had to start with what sounds good is because I'm in that situation more and more. And so it's just out of necessity. Um, the one of the number one examples is Pop Tarts. Like, and I've made that joke so many times, but like, I mean, it's a true story. The only time I eat Pop Tarts is on a hunt, really. And I don't eat them day to day. I don't, they're not even like on my radar as a treat. They are the thing that I associate with a trip. And so it doesn't have to be breakfast. It could be 3 in the afternoon when I consume it. And I've eaten them at 10 o'clock at night, right? It doesn't matter. A Pop Tart to me is like, oh, that's always going to sound good. Um, the last couple of years, Nature Valley nut butter biscuits. So it's like a biscuity, crackery thing with a layer of nut butter in between. It helps that they're cheap, and they also come in multiple flavors, so you can add some variety. But those always sound really good to me and have a really good consistency. Um, it's funny you brought up gummy bears because that's what, you've become known for, and some of that's been associated with us because it's through our podcast, and uh, we've eaten a lot of gummy bears. But those sound less and less appetizing year after year. So I've actually eaten way less of those. I sometimes might still pack them, but yeah, so it changes. And that's the other thing is I let myself, say, oh, this sounded great last year. It doesn't mean I need to eat it this year, right? Um, so yeah, it can vary and things will look different if you look at like a packed food list from last fall to 3 years ago. And it's not necessarily that even principles have changed. It's this is what sounded good when I was putting this together, and this is what I've learned doesn't sound good. Another random one is it's either a Cajun or a Tex-Mex like snack mix. It's
Like the
peanuts and like sesame
spicy.
sticks, yeah, that type of thing, but it's
Oh,
kind of
that
the
sounds good.
spicy, yeah. So, yeah, those are a few things that just, at least in the last couple of years, have always sounded good.
Cool. I think for me, if I had to pick, the first things that come to mind, if I'm able to do it, if it's a really short trip, PB and J's. I mean, as or Uncrustables, like as long as I can get them to last by day three, you're hurting. Like
Yeah,
they're not doing good. But the first couple days, like I might put one or two in the first day or two, and I love those. Pop Tarts are good. And then those Audrey bars that we make, like just like the homemade granola bar things. I try to throw. I like throwing those in there too. But
yeah.
I think we should, if you're up for it, post both because you have a really good one, and they're totally different in taste
Hmm.
and type. Unless you guys are going to post one with Steve's.
Well, we are in the sense that we said we're going to, and we keep meaning to, but haven't yet. But I'm totally fine with sharing it, yeah, with you. So whether it'd be fun to have all three, right? Like we'll get your recipe, my recipe, and Steve's recipe for listeners. Like we've each separately taken different recipes independently from different sources, modified them, and created a bar essentially that's homemade that each of the three of us independently really like. But I know that like I've tried all of them. I've tried yours, Kyle. I've tried Steve's. They're all really good and all very different. So it will be great to have different recipes for guys to play with.
If this happens, you'll see a link in the show notes. If it's not in there, this never happened. But we'll try to get together. That would be cool. We can do that.
Do it.
All right, man. Well, thank you for joining me. There you have it. There's three things that have changed in our mind. Of course, if you have any questions, you can always send them over to us at info@v2pnutrition.com, or you could even, it'd be fun to have you guys send us things that you've thought different about or has changed your mind to, but you can send those to us at the same email address, and we'll be back again in a few weeks.